Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we dissect the world's most complicated interceptions and, well, give you the shortcut to understanding what truly matters. Today, we are standing at the nexus of two incredibly powerful forces. You have the revolutionary pace of digital transformation, what the industry calls Pharma 4.0. And on the other side, the absolutely non-negotiable, rigorous world of pharmaceutical regulatory compliance.
And that tension is really the central problem, isn't it? That's why this is so critical right now. I mean, the pharmaceutical sector operates under this mandate of just incredibly stringent oversight.
Right.
It's designed, first and always, to protect patient safety and product quality. So you have this decades-old framework, built on paper and human sign-offs, and now it's being confronted with AI, machine learning, huge cloud infrastructures.
So operating at machine speed.
Exactly. These digital initiatives, they simply must fit seamlessly into that highly robust regulatory structure.
Right. And for you, the listener, you need a blueprint for that. So our mission today is to map out the 6 essential regulatory areas that organizations have to master, not just know, but really master, to achieve a compliant Pharma 4.0 implementation. We're basically providing the global foundations for digital safety and integrity, so you know exactly where the risks and the opportunities lie.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the ultimate foundation, right? Digital data integrity. You can't have a digital manufacturing revolution if you don't actually trust the data the machines are generating. So in the U.S., the gold standard here is FDA 21 CFR Part 11.
It is. Part 11 defines the fundamental criteria for electronic records and signatures, essentially what makes them legally trustworthy, reliable, and, well, equivalent to ink on paper.
And this applies across the board.
Oh, yes. It's universal. Drug makers, clinical research labs, medical device manufacturers. The mandate is really clear. Robust controls, system validation, secure, computer-generated audit trails that track every single change.
And those trails have to be reviewed.
Routinely reviewed, that's key. And crucially, the electronic signatures. They need unique IDs and authentication measures. They have to be secure enough to stand up in court. So if we shift our focus across the Atlantic, how does the European approach, specifically EU GMP Annex 11, how does that align with Part 11?
Annex 11 is the European guide for using computerized systems in any good manufacturing practice or GMP activity.
So everything from the factory floor to the databases.
Everything. And while it's similar to Part 11, Annex 11 really emphasizes qualification and validation using a life cycle approach and a risk-based assessment. You need objective proof the system does exactly what it's supposed to. And that includes finding and fixing every error before the system goes live.
What's so fascinating here is that both the US and EU regulations, they kind of funnel down to one universal metric for data quality, the acronym everyone in the industry talks about, ALCOA plus... Most people know the basic 5 elements, but in this Pharma 4.0 era, the real headache is in the plus criteria.
Exactly. We can assume most people get the core LCOA principles.
Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate.
Right. And those are hard enough to maintain manually. But then you introduce machine learning, IoT sensors, generating petabytes of real-time data. And suddenly the plus criteria become the compliance bottleneck. We're talking complete, consistent, enduring, and available.
Okay, let's zero in on one of those. Why is consistent so challenging for machine-generated data?
Consistency demands chronological integrity. In a manual paper system, it's pretty easy to audit if entries are out of order.
Sure, you just look at the dates.
Right, but in Pharma 4.0, sensor data is constantly streaming. If a system fails or a connection drops, ensuring that the restored data stream is chronologically consistent with the moments of failure with no gaps, no manipulated timestamps, that's technically very intense.
The complexity just explodes.
Infinitely. You're managing hundreds of simultaneous data streams, not one single log. And that's why ALCOA Plus is the indispensable foundation of trust here.
So we've established the standard for the data itself, LCOA plus A, but that data is only as good as the system creating it. Which brings us to our second pillar, validation. How we prove these digital systems are reliable. And traditional computer system validation, or CSV, has become infamous for being just painfully slow and paper-intensive.
It's been a massive inhibitor of speed. For decades, the mantra was just document everything. And it resulted in these huge binders of validation protocols that were often more complex than the software itself.
Right.
The shift to risk-based CSV, which is supported by guidelines like GAMP5, is fundamentally about efficiency. The whole strategy is to stop validating every little function equally. Instead, You focus validation efforts where they matter most on areas posing the greatest risk to product quality and patient safety.
I think the GAMP5 categorization is a perfect example of this. Can you walk us through the difference between, say, a Category 1 infrastructure software and a Category 5 custom application, and why that saves so much time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A Category 1 system might be your basic network infrastructure. Stable, common stuff.
Yeah.
You need minimal validation there.
Yeah.
But a Category 5 application, that's a different story. That could be a custom-built AI algorithm for real-time quality control. That requires comprehensive, resource-intensive validation. So by putting, say, 90% of your resources on that 10% of high-risk code, you achieve safety without all the waste.
And here's where it gets really interesting. As we move beyond GAMP5 into this modern regulatory mindset, what's being called Validation 4.0, the big headline here is Computer Software Assurance, or CSA. What's the real benefit? Why should a company care?
CSA is a profound regulatory evolution, and it's signaled by the FDA. It's a move away from that unnecessary documentation, that did you document the documentation mentality, and a move towards critical thinking, automated testing, and relying on vendor documentation for non-critical systems. The real insight of CSA is the massive reduction in time and cost. A traditional CSV for a moderate risk system could take 6 months. CSA aims to cut that by 50 to 70% for the low-risk systems. That dramatically accelerates your time to market.
But practically, how does a company that has only ever trusted paper trails make that shift? It seems like a huge culture change, not just a technical one.
It requires leadership. It's about convincing your QA departments that critical thinking is a form of documentation, and that objective evidence can be gathered digitally and efficiently.
Right.
Validation 4.0 is about lifecycle validation. Systems are continuously monitored, not just validated once. The assurance is ongoing, driven by real-time analytics, which regulators are now learning to trust more than a binder full of old paper.
Okay, so once you validated your system and you know it generates good data, well, now that system is holding incredibly valuable IP and patient histories. If you don't secure it, the integrity you just worked so hard to validate is instantly compromised. Which takes us right into our third pillar, the high-stakes world of cybersecurity and data privacy.
The threat landscape is honestly terrifying. Pharmaceutical companies hold some of the most sensitive and valuable data on the planet.
Patented formulas, trade secrets, clinical histories.
It's a goldmine for state actors and cybercriminals. Our sources showed that a shocking 98% of pharma firms surveyed had experienced at least one intrusion.
And the FDA's response here is critical. Their guidance for medical devices, for example, it invokes authority under 21 CFR Part 820, the Quality System Regulation, to mandate security. What's the key insight in that linkage?
This is so important. The FDA views poor cybersecurity as a failure in quality control. That makes it a product quality issue, not just some IT problem.
So the stakes are much higher.
Exactly. If your system is compromised, your data integrity, your ALCOA plus, is gone. The product safety can't be verified. This is why the FDA recommends deploying a secure product development framework, or SPDF, from the initial design all the way to decommissioning.
And why is that security by design approach so crucial for Pharma 4.0?
It's purely pragmatic. If you integrate security during the design phase, you reduce the need for expensive, resource-intensive re-engineering later on. Retrofitting security is just far more costly and disruptive than building it in from the start.
And speaking of security, any organization dealing with data from EU citizens has to comply with GDPR no matter where they're based.
GDPR is the foundational privacy law. It covers patient medical histories, genetic data, all of it. It requires specific, informed consent and robust security like encryption and strict access controls. And what's more, UDRELIC stipulates that you must keep impeccable records of any data you share with third parties, who gets it, why, and for how long.
And failing to do that has led to massive fines, right? We've seen cases with major players like Novartis and Sanofi.
Absolutely. These aren't just minor reprimands. They are serious financial and compliance liabilities. And technically, the whole Pharma 4.0 environment with cloud, remote access, all these IoT sensors, it demands sophisticated defenses. You need modern architectures like network segmentation and critically zero-trust architecture to mitigate risks like ransomware.
Explain zero trust in a smart factory. Why is it so necessary now?
Because the traditional network perimeter is gone. In Pharma 4.0, your devices, the IoT sensors, the robotics, the remote instruments, they are the new endpoints.
Right.
Zero trust operates on the principle of never trust, always verify. It means that if a single IoT sensor is compromised, that breach doesn't automatically give an attacker access to, say, the critical formulation database.
Mm.
Every device, every user, every data flow has to be authenticated and continuously verified. It isolates threats locally.
So far, we've covered the necessary hurdles, but regulators aren't just imposing challenges, they are actively trying to facilitate innovation. Let's look at the proactive programs designed to help companies succeed, starting with the FDO.
The FDA has championed the Emerging Technology Program, or ETP, since 2014. It really signals a willingness to adapt. This program provides a crucial pathway for the industry to get approval for applications that use innovative tech.
And this is where we see things like continuous manufacturing or robotics for aseptic filling get the official green light. The mechanism seems genius. Companies engage early with the Emerging Technology Team, the ETT, to resolve roadblocks before they submit their final application.
That early collaborative engagement is the key. Once the technology is well understood and the FDA is comfortable with it, it graduates to the standard quality assessment process.
So it's a de-risked path.
A structured, de-risked path for adopting cutting-edge methods.
And the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, they mirror this with their own digital transformation initiatives. They have specific task forces focused on data analytics, regulatory science, all aimed at integrating new technologies safely.
But looking toward the future of regulation, the most profound concept being proposed in the EU right now is the regulatory sandbox. This isn't just a proposal, it represents a fundamental shift in strategy.
So what is a sandbox environment? What does it actually entail?
Think of it as a controlled test environment. It's a structured, regulated, and time-limited framework where innovative digital tech, including AI, can be deployed and tested in a real-world setting. But it's all subject to robust regulatory safeguards.
The purpose is brilliant, really. You generate real-world evidence of safety and compliance under actual operating conditions. And that evidence can then directly inform future changes to EU medicines rules. It allows for a much more adaptive approach.
It explicitly facilitates the early but safe deployment of digital health and AI. And that leads us perfectly into the fifth pillar, governing artificial intelligence and machine learning models. These require unique approaches because of their learning nature. The FDA is addressing this with new guidance expected in early 2025. They're laying out a rigorous, risk-based credibility assessment framework.
So what's the core mandate for companies using AI? What do they have to prove?
They have to demonstrate that their AI models are, in no uncertain terms, fit for purpose for their specific intended use. This is done through rigorous, continuous validation that addresses risks around bias, reliability, and transparency. And here's the key takeaway. AI-driven evidence must meet the exact same standard of evidence as traditional approaches.
So if a machine generates the conclusion, it has to be just as trustworthy as a human-led trial.
Precisely. So validation for AI goes beyond the initial verification and validation you do for traditional software.
How so?
AI validation needs 3 phases. An initial pre-market evaluation, then post-market surveillance to make sure it performs in the real world, and then continuous monitoring and governance throughout its life cycle.
So verification and validation are just the start.
Right. Verification ensures the algorithm performs as configured. Validation ensures it actually meets the user's requirements, especially as the model learns and potentially changes its own decision-making.
That continuous monitoring must be vital for combating bias. Since AI relies on training data, any bias in that data, say, historical disparities in patient care could be amplified by the model.
It can be, yes. That's why transparency in model governance becomes a cornerstone of compliance. And finally, let's tie all of this together by looking globally. The pharmaceutical market is international, so regulators have to harmonize. This is where the International Council for Harmonization, or ICH, plays a crucial role.
And the ICH includes the US, the EU, Japan, and others. They're focused on standardizing approval processes. So how are their guidelines bridging that gap between traditional manufacturing and Pharma 4.0?
Their quality guidelines, specifically Q8 through Q12, provide the framework for applying science and risk-based principles. This allows new operating models like Pharma 4.0 to integrate digital maturity while still retaining those foundational quality standards that are accepted globally.
But even with convergence, there are still regional variations. You have the centralized FDA approach focused on consumer protection versus the EU's approach of synchronizing legislation across all its member states.
And you can't ignore the acceleration in the Asia-Pacific region. Japan's PMDA is mature and stringent, but countries like China are rapidly reforming. China's NMPA has dramatically reduced drug approval timelines.
They're making a huge push to become a biopharma leader.
Exactly. And that requires speed and digital maturity.
So these local accelerations, plus convergence efforts like ICH and Project Orbis, they signal a clear trend. But local data requirements still mean companies have to involve participants from Japan and China early in global trials to avoid delays.
So, to synthesize all this, successful Pharma 4.0 implementation relies entirely on strategy, not just adopting shiny new tech. It's built on mastering data integrity with ALCOA plus proven, adopting that risk-based digital-first validation with CSA, and embedding security from day one with SPDF and Zero Trust. These 6 areas, data integrity, modern validation, cybersecurity, data privacy, innovation support, and AI governance, they are the non-negotiable pillars.
And here's the final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. We know the FDA demands that AI-driven evidence meets the same standard as traditional evidence. Now, given that the global regulatory landscape is building specialized environments like the EU regulatory sandboxes that are explicitly designed to generate verified real-world evidence for new tech, how will the global proliferation of these sandboxes fundamentally change how pharmaceutical innovation and safety standards are legislated in the next 5 years? Will real-world evidence generated in a sandbox eventually supersede the lengthy traditional trial process? Think about the implications of that convergence. We'll leave you there for this deep dive.